So, okay, so let me just get set up here. Okay, I think we're ready. So welcome everybody to the LSA peer reviewing webinar. My name is Kamil Dean from the University of Hawaii, and I'm joined by my co-senior program committee chair, David Quinto-Pozos from the University of Texas at Austin. And we were also joined by V. Le, who is from the LSA. And we have a couple of ASL interpreters as well. You're here because you're interested in reviewing for the LSA, which we're all very happy about. And what we'd like to do is, first of all, notify you that this webinar is being recorded, so be aware of that. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to present some basic things about reviewing so as to give you a sense of what the expectations are for a review for the LSA. The
Can everybody still hear me?
Yeah, I think we
Okay,
lost.
great, good. Kamal was having some technical issues earlier, and so I'm going to jump in when his audio or his video goes out. So I'm David Quinto-Pozos. This is my sign name, if you're curious. And Kamal and I will walk you through some of the things that we thought were important to share with respect to the reviewing for these abstracts. Now, let's see. Kamal was sharing his screen, is that right? Are you able to share yours and we can just have you advance the slides, or what's the best way to do it?
I can do that. Thank you.
Yeah. And while V gets those slides up and running, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. We appreciate your time. We know that your time is precious, and so we have it planned out so that go ahead and go to the next slide, V. We have it planned out so that Kamal and I are going to be able to talk about some of these items that we'd like to share with you within the very first part of the session, and then leave plenty of time for question and answer so that we can have a discussion. If you have, updates or curiosities that you'd like to kind of get clarified, we certainly are there to help with that.
My apologies. I think I fixed my internet problem. I've been having a lot of problems recently, but I think we're ready. I think we're ready to go.
Okay,
So,
great.
thanks, David. Thanks for jumping in there.
No problem. And Kamal, so V is sharing her screen and so we just let her know to advance the slides.
Oh, actually, I think I've taken over as so I think I've got control of them now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay. So, as I was saying before I got cut off rudely by the internet, we're going to have about a 15-minute presentation of the what's, the whys, and the hows of peer reviewing for the LSA, and then we'll have lots of time for questions afterwards. First thing we want to say is thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being willing to review. It's an important service for the field. It's important that we have good reviewers, and we're really glad that you're here. It shows that you're diligent about this activity. And the LSA annual meeting would not happen were it not for that kind of commitment. So we definitely could not do this without your assistance. And you are duly noted as good reviewers here. First of all, what is peer review? What do we expect peer review to be? It's the evaluation of research or any other sorts of professional work by professional scholars in the same field, such as yourself. So you're all linguists of some flavor, and we're going to need you to review abstracts that are somewhat in your domain, because you're the best people to be able to assess the quality of this research. So why do we do peer review at the LSA? Well, scholars like yourself who submit research for peer-reviewed conferences I think you should have an obligation to review in return. If you're going to be submitting abstracts and articles to journals, and you're going to expect them to be reviewed and assessed, then I think you need to give back in the same form for other scholars who have the same expectations. That's the only way a field like linguistics is going to function, is if we give back what we take from the field. It's also a good idea to do peer reviewing because it really helps you write better abstracts. When you're writing your own abstracts after you reviewed a few times, you get a sense of what a good abstract is and what a bad abstract is, and that makes you a better writer of abstracts, and then ultimately a better reviewer of abstracts as well. It gives you really good practice at critique, which is a difficult task. It's cognitively a challenging task, but being able to go through 10, 12, 15 abstracts and note the critical points and the positive points of each of the abstracts, that's a skill, and it requires practice. One of the things I love the most about peer review is that what I'm reading as a reviewer is really the cutting edge of the discipline. These are people whose research is just coming out, and I find that really exciting, and I hope that you will too. And of course, because we want this annual meeting to be the very best annual meeting that we can make it, we want it to represent the best in the field, and so your service here is very, very needed and helpful. So how do you go about doing the review? Well, there are instructions that should have been sent to you by email. There are some sample reviews attached to that email, and there are instructions within Oxford Abstracts for you. So there is a lot of literature. If you're a first-time reviewer, it may be overwhelming, in which case, feel free to reach out to me or to David or to V, and we'll try to guide you through getting into the abstracts. Everything is reviewed within this platform, Oxford Abstracts. So you need to log into Oxford Abstracts, which is where um, people that are submitting abstracts, they have to log into Oxford Abstracts and submit through Oxford Abstracts. And all the reviews happen through Oxford Abstracts. And all the decisions that David, me, and the rest of the program committee make will be done in Oxford Abstracts. So that's our central platform. So you need to have an Oxford Abstracts login, which at this point I assume that you do. And if you don't, it's relatively easy to set up. Now, once you get in and you start to do your review, if we start with a big level, what is your goal? There are basically two goals, and there are two audiences that you're writing to. So the two goals are here on the screen. We want you to be evaluative, and we want you to be constructive. So evaluative, by what we mean by evaluative is that you want to assess the quality of the research that's being done. And I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes, what the criteria are for quality. But you want to look at the quality and you want to give it some sort of ranking of how good that abstract is, how interesting it'll be, how cutting edge it is, how contributive it will be to the field, etc. So we're looking for quality. The second goal that you have is to be constructive. So when you're critiquing an abstract, there are several ways you can do it, one of which is to rip it down, right? To point out all the flaws in the abstract. We don't really want reviews to be negative in that way. What we're looking for is to be constructive and helpful to people that submit to the LSA. We want there to be a positivity around the review, even if it's a critical review. So you can do that. You can be critical and reject an abstract, but you can still do it in a constructive and a positive way. So that's what we're hoping that you'll be able to do. Be positive and constructive, and yet at the same time be evaluative. Now, as you're doing your review, you have two audiences. You have the program committee, which is the body of linguists that are going to decide whether to accept that individual abstract or reject it or put it in some sort of medial category. And you also have the reviewer, the submitter themselves, the author of the abstract themselves. So you kind of have to think about both audiences as you're doing your review. Now, the program committee will rely heavily on the particular numerical score that you give an abstract. It'll be ranked on a score. It'll be scored on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So we're going to look at that as a first parse for where to put the abstract in terms of priority for admission. But we'll also look at the comments. So if there are abstracts that are somewhere in the middle, we're going to look at the comments that each reviewer submits, and we'll try to use that to gauge whether this abstract really should be accepted or whether it should be rejected. So the program committee will use primarily the score, but also the comments. But the comments, when are primarily for the authors themselves. So when you see something that could be better about the abstract, it would be best if you could put it in the comment section in some sort of constructive way, so that the author, whether accepted or rejected, they'll see that and they'll say, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe that's what I can do. And if you see something really positive about an abstract, go ahead and note it down, because that really helps an author when you see, because sometimes you're not sure whether what you're doing is exactly right. And when the reviewers come back and say, that's fantastic, that's very encouraging. And that will likely show up in their presentation at the LSA meeting. So go ahead and put your thoughts down in there, primarily aimed at the authors, so that that can help them in their creation of the talk, or if it's rejected, in their reapplication to either LSA or some other conference. We're going to talk more about each of these in just a few minutes.
Kamal, I'm going to add one little point here, just
Please,
because
yeah.
the question about the emails sent out with information about the reviewing process, and it seems as though maybe those have not been sent yet. And I think that we need to make sure that we have that final list of the reviewers and get those sent out. So everyone just sit tight. Thanks for letting us know that you haven't received the emails yet, but we'll get on that pretty quickly here.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so in terms of evaluation, these are 3 primary factors that we think you can use for the LSA review process, but you can also use for the review process at just about any other conference. So when we review abstracts, we look for primarily these 3 things. The first is clarity of presentation. That matters a lot. So when you read the entire abstract, 500 words roughly, is it clear what the central question is, what the hypothesis is, what the claim is, what the point of this project is to you? If it's not clear to you as a reviewer, it doesn't mean that you're a bad reviewer. It doesn't mean that you're not smart enough. It means that the author didn't make it clear enough. So if it's unclear, read it again and read it again. Make sure that you've given it a fair chance. But if it's not clear, that's a big red flag, because it means, in all likelihood, that if that abstract is accepted, and if this person presents at the LSA annual meeting, the talk itself will unlikely to be clear. So clarity of presentation is an important factor. And that's sort of a global assessment, but you want to look at questions of, do I know what they're trying to do? Do I know why they're trying to do it? Is it clear what the goal of this project is? The second major factor is the quality of the work. So given that you've understood what the goals of the project are, does this abstract accomplish those goals, or at least get some way towards accomplishing those goals? And that's a question of whether, so if it's like an experimental abstract, did they design their experiment appropriately for the research question? Or if it's collecting data, did they collect the right kind of data for the research question that they're looking at? Or if it's documenting a language, did they do the right kinds of language documentation for the particular problems that a community are facing, for example, right? So is the project, is the abstract appropriate to the goals as you understand them? And the final major factor that we look at is the significance of the work. Now, this is a little bit subjective because you have to assess, you kind of have to know the field or the subfield, and you have to be able to assess whether what's being presented in the abstract is going to push the field forward in some way. Is it going to move the field in any way? Is it going to be of interest to a community of linguists that will be at the LSA meeting? Is it important to the field of linguistics? And by the field of linguistics, what we mean is really a broad view of what linguistics is. I think amongst academic disciplines, linguistics is one of the broadest because language touches so many different spheres of humanity. You could have highly psycholinguistic types of things. You can have highly computational types of things. You can have usage-based research. You can have generative research, highly formal or highly informal, completely documentary. You can have things that are like more like discourse analysis or things that are really technical, like phonetic analysis and whatnot. All of that we think should be included. And ideally, you will receive abstracts that are within your particular area of expertise. So you won't have to go too far, but we want you to be inclusive when you consider um, the significance of a piece of work to the field. So just because it isn't in your particular subdomain doesn't make it insignificant. So for example, I'm a generativist myself by training, but if I get an abstract that is, say, a usage-based abstract or a documentary abstract, I need to make sure that I don't assess the significance of that to a particular genre of generative linguistics. I want to look at it and say, could there be linguists, a substantial number of linguists in the field that would find this significant? And I think I have the maturity to be able to do that, and I'm sure you do too. So we just need to make sure it's not, oh, this is uninteresting to me, therefore I'm going to reject it. It's you have to think more broadly than that.
Kamal, do you mind if I add something with
Please,
respect to
please.
that? Because I think that that's a really good point that Kamal just made. That means that you may be reviewing abstracts that are quite different than the type of work that you do. You might be someone who does experimental work, but you're reviewing an abstract whereby the author, the submitter, didn't run any experiments at all. They're looking at data, maybe they have some examples from a language, right, that they just want to highlight. And so obviously the methodology of those two types of approaches are going to be quite different. The analyses of those two types of approaches are going to be quite different. So you'll just have to take those into account and see how whatever the methodology is, whatever the analysis is it clear? Is it a strong methodology? Is it an analysis that you think is appropriate? Those are the kinds of metrics you want to be thinking about, because then you'll be able to evaluate really a pretty broad set of abstracts that are even within a single field. And then the last thing I'll add about the significance piece is that one question to ask yourself is this work that's being proposed in this abstract, is it pushing the field forward in some way, right? Is it advancing that area of the field? And it's a subfield, a larger field, whatever it is it, or is it just kind of, something that we already know, something that has already been established, but it's not providing anything that's novel. So significance kind of gives us a little bit about how we're pushing the field forward and learning more based on this particular work. And this ties in with what Kamal was saying earlier about you'll be reviewing cutting edge research, right? Projects that people are working on right now. And then my last point is, because people are working on these projects right now, there are varying levels of completeness of any project that you will see, right? There are actually some abstracts where you'll see the whole project is kind of laid out in front of you. It's got the very clear research question. It has the kinds of data that were used for the analysis. It has a little bit of information about the analysis and conclusions. And then you'll also come across abstracts where it's sort of a work in progress. They have the research question, they have the approach, the methodology, they're collecting data, but maybe they've not completed, right? So they have more of a preliminary analysis to share, right? And obviously those are quite different, right? If there's not enough to evaluate, then there just isn't enough. And that means that it shouldn't be a strong abstract if there's not enough to evaluate. But just because it's not a completed study doesn't mean that it's a weak study, right? You kind of have to project out based on what it is that you do have, and then be able to make a decision or make your comments based on that. And you can have comments that say, well, this seems to be a work in progress, but based on what the authors wrote about, it appears as though whatever. But keep those points in mind. Thanks, Kamal.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. One last point on this is that when we say we want you to be inclusive, it's not just about theoretical domains or methodology. We get a lot of abstracts at the LSA that are not really content oriented, meaning they're not looking at linguistic research. So a very large part of the LSA involves the development of the profession more broadly. So that includes things like teaching. It includes increasing participation in linguistics or in a particular subdiscipline. It includes things like increasing diversity in the field or professional development, or even things about how to not be a professional linguist, right? So if you're being trained in a degree in linguistics, what are your options outside of academia? So those are not, as we might say, research-oriented abstracts. They're sort of professional or teaching or other kinds of abstracts, and those are perfectly appropriate for the LSA. So we'd like to emphasize the point that you don't reject an abstract just because it's talking about teaching methodology, how to deliver Linguistics 101, for example. That's actually one of the important functions of the LSA annual meeting because it helps us with our professional development. So that's the level of broadness that we're hoping to establish in the LSA. Okay. Okay. The second part of the review process is about being constructive and professional. And this is very important. It's very easy to slip into a critical mode when you're writing comments because, I don't know about you, but when I read reviews, sometimes when I see something, I see great potential in the abstract, and then I see the author didn't do it the way that I would have done it. I get a little bit peeved by that. And it's very easy to slip into writing it out as if you're upset. But this is not personal. What we're trying to do here is to help the author. And so being dismissive of an idea or condescending or somehow negative about an idea is not going to help anybody. This is an anonymous process, so it's not as if they're going to see who you are, so they'll think, oh, you're so smart and you figured this out. That's not how it works, right? It's completely anonymous. And all that you'd be doing is hurting somebody that you don't even know. And you're hurting the LSA because the LSA will come to be known as a place where people get negative reviews. So we hope that you can be positive in what you do. The second point is that we're hoping that your comments will reflect the score that you assigned. So it's kind of unusual, very low ranking, but then your comments are just effusive with praise. So I'm saying be positive, but also make those comments reflect your actual assessment. So don't just give it praise regardless, even though I'm saying be positive. You can still be critical while being constructive, right? So we're going to see an example at the end of a sample abstract, which is a fictitious abstract that is rejected. We'll see the review or some outline of a review, and you'll see an example of this. Don't be afraid to praise, even if the abstract is mediocre, or even if it's positive about it, but then make clear in your comments why you're rejecting, right, in a constructive kind of way. And I guess to sum it all up, what we'd say is use the golden rule, which is if you were submitting an abstract, what kind of review would you like to receive? Would you like it to be destructive? Would you like it to be dismissive and condescending? Probably not. You'd want to read an abstract which is thoughtful, an abstract which is hard and critical because you want to make sure your research is good, but you want it to be fair. And ultimately, when I review abstracts, that's kind of what I do. I try to make sure that I'm being fair to this author, even if it's in a topic that I actually don't particularly value. I try to be as fair as I can. Okay. So I've said this already, and David has said this already a couple of times. What we're looking for is to be inclusive. We want sort of a big tent approach to the annual meeting. We want all different aspects of linguistics to be included. We don't want to be gatekeepers in deciding what counts as linguistics and what doesn't count as linguistics. And we're hoping as reviewers, you won't be gatekeepers either. It's important that we give everybody a fair chance at being represented at the LSA. We often get abstracts from less studied, understudied, underdocumented, or endangered languages. And if you've ever done work with such languages, it's often very difficult to do analysis because so much of your time and effort is spent either in collecting data or even before that, creating community relationships. And sometimes that, or often, talking about the way that you establish community relationships is really valuable to linguists. And so we ask you to keep an open mind when it comes to those understudied languages. I think the bar is different for those languages just because of the nature of the data that needs to be collected or the work that goes into those sorts of projects. And as David said earlier, a lot of the work that comes to the LSA is incomplete. That's sort of the nature of our conference. And so if it isn't complete, if it still shows promise, I think we should give it a fair chance. So that sort of is a subjective question. If something looks like it's sort of half-baked, then you score it poorly. But if it's got promise and it looks like there is potential there, then I think we can lean on the side of positivity. So all of this is designed for us to be as for our arms to be as open as we can, because we want the LSA annual meeting to be where everybody can come. The more specialized conferences work a little bit differently. There, they might be a little bit more restrictive. And that's why this webinar is being done. We want you to sort of be more open than if you review for other specialized conferences. Okay, so that's sort of the philosophical approach to how to do abstracts. I want to just quickly take you through the interface, the Oxford Abstract interface. So when you log in for the first time, if you have a Oxford Abstracts login, you log in and you should see at the bottom this Start Reviewing button. On the bottom right, you can see that, I guess, that salmon colored, I don't know what color it is on your screen, but that orange, red, salmon colored button. You click on that and it takes you to a page that looks something like this. And the first thing you should do is, so this will be for the first abstract, for example. And you probably need to download the abstract. I think it depends actually on your browser. In some browsers, it opens in a separate window. In other browsers, it will download directly, but you click on that download button that's in the middle, and that will then give you a PDF that you can open on your computer, and you can read it there. Okay. After you've read it, you come back to Oxford Abstracts, and you enter into the field for that particular abstract. And on the right-hand side is where your review you need to do is view incorrectly. In other words, do you think this abstract came from somebody that you know, that you have a conflict of interest with. So sometimes you may be, for example, an advisor to a student that submitted this abstract, or you might be a student to an advisor that submitted this abstract, or you might have consulted on a particular project and you recognize this as the project you consulted on. In that case, I would say you have a conflict of interest, and you might want to click that button saying that you have a conflict of interest. And in that case, you don't do the review because we don't want conflicted reviews in the pool. But assuming you do not have a conflict of interest, the next box down is where you assign it a score. You assign that abstract a score. So 5 is definitely accept, and those labels are there. When you click the drop down menu, you'll see it says 5 definitely accept, and it goes down to a 1 where you have a definitely reject category. So you need to score your abstract somewhere in that range. So again, just a reminder, we're a big tent. We may not reject abstracts that get low scores. So the program committee may look at abstracts and see, oh, these ones got low scores, but you know what? It's on an understudied languages, and the comments seem to reflect that the reviewers didn't really appreciate that. We're still going to accept it. So it's not the final word on what happens with the abstract, but it is a very important factor. I would say, yeah, the last point on this slide is I wouldn't focus on the trivial things like formatting. Formatting is important. So there's certain parts of formatting which are actually very, very important. But if it's right justified, but you don't like justification, don't score it poorly for that reason. If it's all one big paragraph, but you prefer it to be broken into smaller paragraphs, again, I don't think that's a reason to score it poorly. You want to score it on the basis of those factors that I talked about earlier, right? Quality and significance and that sort of thing. And just a reminder, I sort of said this already, that score will be the first thing that the program committee looks at in order to categorize abstracts into high priority, medium priority, low priority, maybe reject, and definite reject categories. And then we'll move things around based upon some judgment calls that we make.
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna
Yeah.
say one more thing about the scoring. The scoring is always tricky, especially if you're just reviewing for your first time. Um, and you may feel, well, I don't know exactly where to, like, you kind of have, it takes a little bit of time to kind of self-calibrate and know about what score might be the most appropriate. And if you feel like you're confused about the scoring or unsure about it, you just contact Kamal and me, and we'll be able to kind of give you some one-on-one thoughts about it and some suggestions. But just know that that's a hard part of it. Uh, Now, Kamal said that, yeah, the LSA annual meeting is a kind of a big tent sort of approach. We have a pretty broad field, and we have lots of different languages that we work on, lots of different types of approaches that we use. Even so, we can't just accept everybody, right? We don't accept 100% of the abstracts, because if we did, then we wouldn't even need this process, right? We still have to go through the process to essentially filter out those that we feel, wow, this isn't clear at all. We don't know what this presenter is suggesting. That, to me, sort of gives me a hint that if they were to present at the LSA, it might be about the same, right? What Kamal said early on in the presentation today. So it's, you have to kind of keep both of those things in mind. Yes, we're Big Tent, but we have a kind of a level of quality that we want to reach. Right?
Exactly right. That is exactly right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So as for your comments, um, so comments are not obligatory, but they are very, very helpful. And when I submit abstracts, I find the comments to be very, very useful. They're, they can range from one sentence all the way up to 2 or 3 paragraphs in length. I wouldn't write long essays about the abstract. The most helpful comments we found are the ones that begin with like a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what the abstract actually tries to accomplish. And I find that useful when I'm reviewing to do that because it forces me to make sure that I've actually understood the abstract properly. Reading abstracts is a difficult task. It does require a fair amount of making myself write 1 or 2 sentences of summary helps me to focus and make sure that I understand the abstract. And then the rest of your comments are about evaluation. Here's an example of a fakely rejected abstract. And I'll just read the whole thing for you. So this is the kind of abstract, this kind of review, kind of comments that we might expect in an abstract, an abstract review that you might submit, for example. So it says, this paper makes a proposal that auxiliaries have at least 2 distinct forms, one that's accented, one that is deaccented, in order to account for the distribution of auxiliary reduction. Auxiliary reduction is a long-standing puzzle at the morphosyntax phonology interface, and new ideas on how to analyze it are very welcome. So this part so far is a summary and a statement of what the potential impact of this project is, right? Now, all of that is fairly positive. But now the abstract turns critical. So it says, unfortunately, it's not clear from the abstract what range of aspects of auxiliary reduction the author is seeking to account for, nor what languages they may be considering. So you can sort of imagine what this abstract does, right? But that's immediately a red flag. And then this fake reviewer goes on to say, it would be helpful to include explicit examples showing the restrictions on accented versus unaccented forms mentioned, and to note if the author is introducing novel empirical facts about auxiliaries and how their work builds on past literature, including citations. So you'll notice this last part is suggestions for improvement. But in no way is this abstract dismissive or pejorative or negative. It's a rejection, but it's a constructive rejection. It says, I recognize the value of the intent, of the goal, but you didn't quite execute it the way that we'd expect in the field. And these are some of the critical critical faults of the abstract. And here are some ways that you could fix it. Now, to me, if I received that abstract with a rejection, I'd look at that and not say, oh, this reviewer really thought about my abstract. It wasn't just a, nah, not interested, right? It was a thoughtful, considered, reasonable, constructive kind of review. And that's sort of the flavor that we're aiming for with our reviews. So as David said earlier, we want positivity, but you can and should reject the abstracts that aren't high enough in quality for what the LSA is striving for. Okay, so I hope that this will be helpful. We will put these slides, we'll make these slides available to you so you can look at this in the future. And during the review process, if you have questions about your comments, whether you think that they might be dismissive or negative or too constructive or whatever, as David said, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you and work with you on that. Here's some concerns that you may have. So if you think an abstract should be rejected on the basis of formatting, well, I mentioned this earlier, then you should explain your concerns directly to me or David. Okay, so for example, if an abstract is way past the word limit, that's a reasonable reason to reject an abstract. So if it's 900 words where the word limit is 500, that's not a fair way to submit something because everyone else limited themselves to 500 words. This particular submitter should not be given the affordance of an extra 400 words. I think that's a legitimate reason to reject. But if there are other formatting issues, like I said earlier, like justification or paragraphing or things like that, that seems less important to me, even though it's a little bit of a red flag, but it seems less important to me. And if you have concerns about that, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll talk about it and we'll see, and we'll give you our opinions about whether you should ding them on the score because of the formatting or whether you should maybe give it a pass. Okay. Let's see. My slides seem to not be progressing. I don't know why.
I think that's the last slide, Kamal, so
Okay,
we can
there we
open
go.
it up for
We didn't have a
questions.
thank you slide though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, David. So, okay, so that's basically what we have for our presentation. What we'd like to do is to open this up for any questions, or if you have any questions or concerns that you want to raise. We have plenty of time for that. We have about 20 minutes left for that. If you're going to be raising your concerns through audio, if you're going to be speaking out your question, we just ask that you switch on your camera so that the ASL interpreters can see you, and that helps them with their interpretation. Alternatively, you could put a question into the chat box and we could read the question out and address it that way. So, are there any questions that anyone wants to ask at this point in time?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I see Hatam Tamimi. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. Great presentation. First time reviewer for LSA, and I'm very excited. My question is about if we receive an abstract that is within a domain or an area that we're not an expert on, do you recommend that we proceed with the review, or do you recommend that we not do the review and instead decline to review, basically?
A great question. I would say that if it is something that is sort of adjacent to your area and you think you could give it some sort of fair review, I would go ahead and do it. But if it's completely out of your domain, then I'd say get in touch with me and David and we can reassign it. So imagine that you are a language documentarian and you get something that is on computational phonetics, right? Completely outside your domain, and it looks like gobbledygook to you. You really can't understand it. Then definitely get in touch with me and David, because a review from you would not be particularly helpful, right? But if you think you have an opinion that you can read it and say, oh yeah, okay, I can see the worth of that, or I can see that this is poorly done, then you can go ahead and review it. I think it's a judgment call for you in that case.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Go ahead and either raise your hand or type it into the chat box. Oh yeah, so sorry, let me stop sharing. There. Okay. I see somebody in the chat box, Angelito. How should I handle abstracts that contain multiple punctuation and spelling issues that clearly affect its quality? That's a good question. So if the punctuation is particularly bad, I would note it in the comments. But for me, and David, maybe you have an opinion about this, but for me, uh, bad punctuation and bad spelling of that sort sometimes reflects a non-native speaker of English. And I myself am more generous to non-native speakers of English. What I would try to do is to look to see if the ideas are presented in a coherent way. If you can see that the ideas are presented in a coherent way, that there is appropriate background provided, so you know this person has read the literature, and this person has like a hypothesis, this person collected data, if that's appropriate, in the right way, and their conclusion matches the data that they have, the formatting in that case would be far less important for me. But if the rest of the abstract is a little unclear and it's meandering and the punctuation is all over the place, then that would be a red flag for me. And then it would actually be something that I would note in the comments, and I would score it lower partly because of that. So it's a question of whether the whole thing fits together. And if it looks like it's sort of a non-native speaker writing the abstract, then I'm going to be much more generous in that respect. provided that the ideas are clear. David, would you agree with that, or you have a different thought on that?
I would agree with that. I think that for me, the spelling errors and punctuation errors are really pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Sometimes people don't write clearly, even though they may spell well or their punctuation may be fine. They may not write in a way where you can follow the logic or you don't understand. That's actually more concerning, right? That if I can't follow it, what it is that what they're writing about, then I can't evaluate it. It's difficult for me to evaluate. So obviously, if I were reviewing an abstract like that, I probably would give it a lower score because I don't have something to hold on to. I don't know what they're doing, right? But punctuation, spelling, I overlook those things because, as Kamal said, there are many non-native speakers, users of English in our field. Our field is kind of by default, we look at different languages of the world, and so I think that that's not an issue from my point of view.
Yeah, just to reiterate what David said, what we want you to focus on mostly are those factors we mentioned earlier, which is quality and coherence and significance to the field. Those are the things that you want to focus on and try to look past these formatting issues, unless it really impedes on comprehensibility or whether you think that that reflects um, a lack of professionalism on the part of the author.
Mhm. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think everyone should strive to to format things appropriately. Some people just don't have that within their ability, but yet they're good linguists, right? So we sort of have to take each case case by case. Other questions, either live by audio or in the chat box?
Just to wrap around to something we talked about earlier, I know that some people arrived a little bit late. We were talking about an email that is to be sent to everyone, all the reviewers, and that has information about the reviewing process, and it will also it should have a link to these slides. And so just to clarify, that has not been sent yet, and we will make sure that that gets sent soon. And it will also have a link to these slides so that you can take a look at them if you wanted to go back to something that we said. It'll also have a link to the recording of this session so that you can go back to that as well. So you'll have multiple ways that you can get back to the information that we've talked about today.
Just to give you some information, we've just, because the deadline for submission was yesterday, we're just beginning to get some numbers on the number of abstracts that we have. And it looks like, given the number of abstracts we received and the number of reviewers that we have, looks like you will probably receive somewhere on the order of 10 to 12, maybe, yeah, 10 to 12 abstracts is what we expect for you to review. It might be 8 in your case, or it might be 15 in your case, but probably no more than that level of variation. Each abstract is 500 words in length, so that'll give you a sense of how much work it is. If this is your first time reviewing, I'd probably estimate you're going to spend, I don't know, first time reviewers, maybe 20, 25 minutes per abstract. So that's a couple of hours of work. And I would say if this is your first time, take your time and really enjoy it,
Yeah.
actually, because you'll be learning something new
Right.
with each of these abstracts.
Maybe more like 5 hours of work. So set aside enough time to do it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's your first time, you just need to get used to the process. And you don't want to rush through the process either. So our suggestion would be, especially if you're a first-time reviewer, to get started early. Once you have your assignment, which we haven't talked about yet, over the next 2 weeks or so, Kamal and I and the junior co-chairs will be working on which reviewers are going to be reviewing which abstracts, and then we'll be able to make those assignments later on in the month. I think we're shooting for about mid to third week of July or so for the abstract assignments. So between now and then, you have some time to re-review these materials that I just pointed to, the presentation from today, the the materials that are sent via email. And then you'll have a few weeks to get those reviews done, but definitely set aside enough time so that you can, and like I said, if you can jump on that early, that way, if you have some difficulties or challenges, you can reach out to Kamal or me, and then we can help kind of help you work through those challenges, and then the process probably will go more smoothly after that.
Yeah. So as David was talking, I just looked up some of the dates, and I'll share those with you so that you can get a sense of when to plan for this to be happening. We're hoping to be sending out your assignments around the 26th of July. It may be plus or minus a day or so, but around the 26th of July. And you'll get a little bit more than 2 weeks, about 3 weeks to review. So we'd like the reviews back to us by about the 16th of August. And we'll be sending you reminders once in a while to make sure that you get that done. That deadline is quite important because there's so many things that need to happen with those reviews that we need to sort out all the abstracts and create a program, and it all needs to go live. It's a massive, massive event. So we're going to be pushing you quite hard when it comes close to that 16th of August deadline. So that gives you a sense of when you should budget your time for this activity.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, if not, if there are no more questions, I'd like to encourage you all, if you do have any questions that come up in the next few days or weeks, or when you get your assignments, feel free to reach out to either David or me or both of us, and we'll happily answer your questions. And once again, thank you all very, very much for agreeing to do this. We hope that you'll become regular reviewers for the LSA, and we hope that we'll see you in Philadelphia in January of 2025. And until then, all the best. Take care. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your
Bye,
time.
everyone.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you to the interpreters.
Thank you. Yes.